The late afternoon sun bled across the prairie, setting fire to the endless grasslands. Emmett Klein stood at the station platform, boots planted in the dust, a folded letter in his hand. The handwriting was neat, feminine, promising a future that seemed almost too fragile to hold. He had read the words until the ink felt burned into his eyes. Your homestead sounds quiet. I wish for quiet too. If you will have me, I will come. He had imagined her a dozen ways, plain, pretty, timid, hopeful, anything but the echo of his past. The stagecoach rumbled closer, wood groaning, wheels throwing up a storm of dust. A few townsfolk lingered nearby, curious as they always were when a new bride was delivered by mail and promise. Emmett's throat tightened. He had not courted in years, not since the bitter split that had left him more alone than the land itself. The coach shuddered to a halt. The driver jumped down, cursing the heat, and swung open the door. A figure stepped into the light. Her dress was travel-worn, the hem dark with dust. She moved with the same sure grace he remembered, the kind that never bowed, never yielded. Her face caught the sun, and Emmett felt the air go out of his lungs. It was her. Clara, the woman he had once called wife. The letter crumpled in his hand. This was not the stranger he had bargained for, not the quiet companion he had paid to bring across miles of wilderness. This was the woman who had walked out on him 5 years ago, leaving only silence and papers signed under a shaking lamplight. The platform buzzed with whispers. Mrs. Avery from the Mercantile leaned in close to her husband, muttering behind a hand. Emmett heard his name carried on their voices. The story would travel faster than the coach had. Clara's eyes locked on him. They were the same shade he remembered, storm gray, sharp enough to cut a man open. She carried a single trunk, small enough to speak of either poverty or pride. She did not smile. She did not falter. She walked straight toward him, as if every mile of separation had meant nothing. "Emmett," she said softly, her voice low but steady. The years collapsed in an instant. He had waited for a bride, and his past had come instead. They rode out of town at a careful pace, the coach dust settling on their shoulders like ash. Emmett did not offer his hand when Clara climbed into his wagon. She did not ask for it. The lines between them were old as fence wire and just as barbed. The prairie opened, long and empty. Heat shimmered over grass and alkali flats, thunderheads stacked far off where the land rose blue. Emmett watched the team, not her. Clara watched the road, not him. A grasshopper struck the wagon board and clung there a moment before dropping away. Small things held on longer than they should. She traveled light. A trunk scuffed bald at the corners, a shawl rolled tight as a rope, a tin of salve tucked in her palm. When the team balked at a washout, she was first to step down, boots sinking to the ankle. She tested the rut with a stick, measured depth, shifted a stone. No talk, only the work. At the creek crossing he saw the scar, a thin white seam above her wrist, the kind made by a blade or a bottle. He looked once and then away. She eased the horses to water with a low sound from her throat, a steady hum that pulled skittish ears forward. The bay drank. The dun blinked, shoulder twitching at flies. The sound belonged to a woman who had learned the language of things that could break you. They climbed toward his place near sundown. The cabin sat tight to the wind, porch squared, chimney straight, fields stitched in green and dust. The cottonwoods along the draw held a whisper of shade. He had built the second lean-to last winter, hands numb, breath smoking in the air. He had imagined a different woman stepping across those boards, setting a kettle, tucking a braid. That imagined life stood now like a ghost on the threshold, patient, and thin. He set her trunk just inside the door. She stood in the middle of the room and turned once, slow as a surveyor sighting. Bed rolled neat, table planed smooth. 2 chairs that did not match. A Bible with cracked leather. A tin of coffee half full. On the wall, a calendar 2 months wrong. Clara moved to the stove and lifted the lid. Cold iron. She set kindling, split with the care of a harpist. Flame took. She did not ask permission. He did not offer it. He brought a sack of meal and a strip of salt pork from the cellar. She cut thin, fried slow, poured corn batter into the pan, waited for the right sound before turning. The room filled with the plain mercy of heat and food. They ate without grace, heads bowed to plates. Outside, a nighthawk skimmed the yard, wings cutting the last light. When she reached for the coffee, her sleeve slid, and he saw the ghost of a ring on her finger, a pale band where the sun had not touched for years. It was not his band. His had been hammered soft from a bridal rosette and cracked the first winter. They had laughed about it once. On the table between them lay his letter, creased and dirt-streaked. The careful hand that had answered him was not hers. He knew it now in the bones. The turns were too clean, the words too gentle. Clara's writing had always carried a small anger in it, a hurry in the tales. "Who wrote?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. She set the cup down, steam braided in the lamplight. "A woman in Cheyenne. Paid a penny a page." No apology, no pride, just the fact. "I told her what to say. Quiet, work, bread, no trouble." He looked at her hands. New callus over old, the seam at the wrist, a bruise yellowing under the sleeve. And the truth. She did not answer at once. She went to the door, lifted the latch, and stepped out to the porch. He followed after a time, the lamp throwing a small circle on the boards. The stars had come up clean. Coyotes sang from the far ridge, thin as wire. Clara leaned on the post the way she always had, hip set, weight easy, reading the wind. "Truth is, I ran out of places to run." She kept her eyes on the dark. "Truth is, a man followed as far as Rollins and swore he'd take back what he said I owed. Truth is, I came where I thought he'd never look." She paused. "Because he knows I would not be welcome here." The words landed heavy and did not break. Emmett felt them in his jaw, his teeth, the hinge of old hurt. "You left," he said, not accusing, only naming the grave. "I did." Her voice did not shake. "Your anger was bigger than the house. My pride was bigger than the fence. We fed both." She touched the post with her fingertips, the way a woman might test bread for done. "I am not here to ask forgiveness." A breath. "I am here to work." Down in the draw, a calf coughed, thin and high. Emmett was already moving, grabbing a lantern, the old milk pail, the rag. She was beside him without being asked, stride long, shawl forgotten on the porch rail. In the pen they found the calf on its knees, belly tight, the cow circling, eyes white with fret. Clara climbed through the rails. She caught the cow's halter in one motion, pressed her hip to the shoulder, and held. No shout, no fight, only weight and patience. Emmett slid the rag under the calf's jaw, eased the teat to its mouth, gave the first pinch to start the milk. The calf found what it needed and pulled hard. Warmth filled the pail, then the dark ground, then the small body that had been losing the light. When it was done, they stood with their breath showing in the cool that comes after heat leaves the dirt. The cow nosed the calf. The calf nosed the world. Clara wiped her hands on her skirt and looked at nothing for a long time. Back at the cabin, she took a bedroll to the floor without asking where to lay it. He did not tell her different. The lamp hissed when he turned it low. The house shrank to the tick of its own boards, and the lift and fall of two chests in the dark. Somewhere out in the night, a horse stamped and settled. He lay on his back, eyes open to rafters he had counted 1,000 times. The truth she had given was not enough, and too much. A man, a debt, a long road, and the old world between them like a river in flood. He told himself he had sent for a stranger and received a problem. He told himself he would take her to town in the morning, send her on with the next coach, write off the loss, write off the years. Before sleep took him, he heard the faintest sound from the floor. Cloth rubbing wood, the small catch a body makes when it refuses to cry. He closed his eyes against it and saw anyway the white seam above her wrist, the pale band at her finger, the way the calf had steadied under her hand. Dawn would ask its price. Fences, water, the bank, the man in Rawlins, the town and its eyes. He turned to the wall and listened to the house breathe. Morning was already walking towards them across the grass. Morning came sharp and gold, the kind that stripped shadows from the land and left nothing hidden. Emmett rose before the rooster, as always, and pulled on his boots by the dim edge of dawn. Clara was already outside, hauling water from the well, the rope creaking against the dry windlass. She moved steady, muscles taut under the travel dress she had slept in. No complaints, no words, only the sound of water sloshing into the tin pail. Emmett stepped past her to the barn. His cattle stirred, restless with the heat building early. He forked hay into the troughs, checked the stalls, ran a hand along Dakota, his oldest bull, scarred from fights but still strong. Clara appeared in the doorway, a bucket of water in each hand as if they weighed nothing. She set them down without looking at him and began sweeping the dust from the floorboards with a stiff broom. It unsettled him, the ease with which she took to his place, as if she had never left. Her movements had not changed, precise, practical, neither asking nor offering. He had not invited her help. She gave it anyway. By mid-morning, word had spread. Riders came along the fence line, pretending to check cattle but slowing when they reached his yard. 2 women passed on their way to town, eyes bright with curiosity, heads bent together in whispers. Emmett felt the weight of their stares like a stone in his chest. At noon, Samuel Avery stopped by under the pretense of asking about corn feed. His gaze lingered too long on Clara, where she stood splitting kindling, her sleeves rolled, her forearms corded with strength. "Didn't know you were expecting company, Klein," Samuel said, voice edged with a smirk. Emmett set his jaw. "Didn't know it was your concern." Clara did not flinch under the attention. She brought the axe down clean, the split wood jumping apart, then stacked it neat against the wall. Samuel raised his brows, muttered something about strong hands, and rode off, dust trailing like smoke. The silence afterward was heavier than words. Emmett tightened the fence latch harder than necessary. Clara brushed the sawdust from her skirt and walked back into the cabin without looking at him. By evening, the air was thick and waiting for rain. Emmett saddled his horse to check the north pasture. Clara followed on foot, long stride carrying her over the grass as if distance were nothing. She said little, but when they reached the far fence, she found the weak post first, leaned her shoulder against it, and held while he hammered it straight. The rhythm of the blows echoed across the wide land, mingling with the faint rumble of thunder far away. When the work was done, they stood side by side, sweat streaking their faces, shirts clinging to their backs. The smell of iron, dust, and storm filled the air. Clara pulled the tie from her hair, letting the wind lift it from her shoulders. For the first time since she had stepped off the coach, she looked less like a ghost from his past and more like a woman made for the land itself, stubborn, scarred, and unyielding. "Neighbors won't stop talking," Emmett said finally, his voice low. She looked at him, gray eyes steady. Let them talk. They've been talking about me for 5 years already. He turned back toward the horizon. The clouds were stacking higher, darker. He could not tell if she meant gossip or the man who still hunted her. Either way, the storm was coming. The storm broke before dawn. Rain hammered the cabin roof, each drop sharp as nails. Wind rattled the shutters, carried dust and grit through the cracks. Emmett sat at the table, nursing black coffee, the kind that scraped the throat. Clara moved across the room in silence, feeding the fire, checking the latch, her hair damp from where the rain had chased her in. When daylight came, the yard was mud. Chickens huddled under the lean-to. A calf bawled from the far pen, calling for a mother that would not answer. Emmett pulled on his slicker, but before he could reach the door, Clara was already there, tying her shawl tight. They crossed the muck together, boots sinking deep. In the pen, they found the cow down, ribs hollow, eyes glazed, life already leaving her. The calf pressed against her side, confused, hungry. Emmett knelt, checked the breath, then straightened slow. He reached for his knife. No. Clara's voice cut through the rain. He turned, blade loose in his hand. She was already kneeling, her skirt soaked, one hand on the cow's flank, the other guiding the calf to her breast. She hummed low, steady, that same tune she'd used with the horses. The cow's eyes blinked once, twice, before going still. The calf suckled at emptiness, then nosed the air, searching. Clara rose, her dress heavy with mud. We'll keep him alive, she said simply. Emmett looked at her, the knife still in his palm. Years ago, she had said almost those same words when their own child had been sick, fever burning through the night. Back then, the words had not been enough. He remembered the grave on the ridge, the way the earth clumped under his shovel, the silence between them after. Now the past stood in the rain with him, stubborn, scarred, and unwilling to let go of life again. He slid the knife back into its sheath. They carried the calf to the barn. It struggled, hooves thrashing, but Clara bore most of the weight, her arms solid as beams. In the stall, she steadied the animal, holding its head while Emmett mixed milk and warm water. They fed it slow, the calf's mouth clamping hard on the rag. After they stood in the dim barn light, steam rising from their wet clothes. Clara's hair clung to her face, a strand across her cheek. Emmett reached to brush it back but stopped short, his hand hanging in the space between them. She saw, but did not move. Thunder rolled again, farther now, pulling their attention to the horizon. Emmett lowered his hand, busying himself with rope and feed, but the air between them had changed. When they returned to the cabin, a rider waited in the yard. A broad man, rain dripping from his hat brim, a scar across his jaw. His horse stamped in the mud, restless. The man tipped his hat just enough to show recognition. "Morning, Klein," he said. His eyes shifted to Clara. "Didn't expect to find you here." Clara went still, her hand tightening around the shawl. Emmett's jaw clenched. He didn't know the man's name, but he knew the type. Hired fists who carried other men's debts. The storm outside had passed. The storm inside had just begun. The rider sat his horse like he owned the land. Rain dripped from his hat brim, pattered on the mud below. His eyes were pale, washed out, but sharp enough to cut through both of them. Emmett stepped forward, lantern glow still clinging to his sleeve from the barn. "You've got business?" His voice was steady, though his chest carried the weight of something heavier than storm clouds. The man's lips curved. "Business with her?" He nudged his chin toward Clara. She left Cheyenne owing more than she could carry. My employer means to collect. Clara's jaw tightened. She didn't flinch, but her hands worked the edge of her shawl, twisting the fabric. You tell your employer, she said flat, that I owe nothing. He took what was his when he broke my arm. Emmett's stomach knotted. The scar, the one above her wrist. It wasn't from accident. It was a mark of what she'd run from. The rider's laugh was low, humorless. A woman don't walk out of a deal just because she changes her mind. Paper says otherwise. Same as paper says this land's yours, Klein, and we both know paper ain't worth much out here. The air hung heavy with the stink of wet horse and rain. Emmett's rifle leaned inside the cabin door, not 10 steps away. His revolver sat in the holster at his side, worn but loaded. His hand stayed still. Clara stepped down from the porch, boots sinking into mud. She stood close enough to the rider that rain dripped from his brim onto her shoulder. I've had enough of men writing my debts for me, she said. Her voice carried no tremor, only steel. The rider's grin faltered. He shifted in the saddle. You think this is done because you're hiding behind your ex-husband? Something in Emmett snapped at that word. Ex. As if 5 years could be wrapped in 3 letters. As if she was nothing but a broken page. He moved before he thought, stepping between them, his hand now resting on the revolver. You'll tell your employer, Emmett said, his voice low, that Clara Klein don't owe him a thing. Not now, not ever. And if he wants to argue, he can ride out here himself. The rider studied him a long moment, pale eyes narrowing. Then he spat into the mud, turned his horse with a jerk of reins, and trotted toward the ridge. His silhouette faded into the gray morning until only hoofbeats marked his leaving. The yard went still again, save for the drip of rain off the eaves. Clara let out a breath she'd been holding. Her shoulders sagged just a fraction. She looked at Emmett then, really looked, as if measuring what had just happened. He had stepped into her fight. He had drawn the line. Neither spoke. Words would have bent beneath the weight of it. Instead, Emmett turned back to the barn, checked the calf, his hands steady though his heart hammered. Clara followed after a while, her shawl clinging heavy with rain, her gray eyes darker than the storm clouds that still rolled low on the horizon. That night, when the lamps were low and the fire burned soft, Emmett lay awake. The house was no longer empty, but emptiness had been easier than this. The weight of another heartbeat, another past pressing against his own. The storm outside had passed. The storm inside was only beginning. The rain left the land washed raw, the air sharp with sage and wet earth. By morning, word of the rider's visit had already spread. Emmett felt it in the way neighbors slowed their wagons when passing his fence line, in the sidelong glances at the mercantile. Gossip moved faster than a storm on the plains. Clara kept to the work. She rose early, split kindling, mended the weak hinges on the chicken coop, patched her shawl with coarse thread from his stores. She moved with the steadiness of someone who had known hunger and cold, and refused to be beaten by either. Emmett watched her sometimes, hidden by the corner of the barn, seeing how her scarred hands fit into his place, as though they had always belonged there. At midday, he rode into town for supplies. The talk was louder there, harder to ignore. Samuel Avery leaned on a post outside the saloon, spitting tobacco and shaking his head. Hear your old wife's back, Klein. Trouble's riding with her. Emmett kept his eyes forward. Then it'll find me, not you. He pushed through the mercantile doors, bought salt, coffee, a coil of rope. Behind him, voices buzzed like flies. When he returned, Clara was hauling stones to shore up the creek bank, sweat streaking her face despite the cool. He dismounted, tied off the horse, and stepped into the water beside her without a word. Together they set rock after rock, the current tugging at their boots. The work said what they could not. Near dusk, the calf bleated from the stall. Clara went to tend it, wiping its muzzle, humming low. Emmett watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, the lantern light painting her face. She was softer then, the hardness slipping, the sound of her voice like the memory of years before. Later, by the fire, he poured 2 cups of coffee. She sat across the table, hair loose for the first time since her arrival, shadows dancing across her face. He slid the cup toward her. She accepted, fingers brushing his, a touch so small it carried more weight than any word. The silence between them shifted. Not gone, but changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of something rebuilding, beam by beam, scar by scar. Outside, coyotes yipped on the ridge, their song carried by the wind. Clara lifted her eyes from the cup. "He'll be back," she said quietly. Emmett nodded. His hand rested on the revolver at his belt, the other wrapped around the tin cup. "Then we'll be ready." The fire cracked, sparks snapping against the iron. For the first time in years, they did not look away from each other. The days stretched lean and long. Summer heat pressed down on the valley, and the land crackled dry beneath the sun. Emmett worked from dawn until his back stiffened, mending fences, clearing brush, checking cattle. Clara matched him step for step, her shadow always near, hauling water, lifting feed sacks that weighed near as much as she did. Neighbors came less often now. The memory of the rider's pale eyes lingered across the prairie, a warning that trouble was circling. Even the boldest gossips grew quiet. Emmett felt it in the air, the same way a man feels the prickle of lightning before a storm breaks. One evening, as he worked in the barn, Clara entered carrying the calf's feed. Her dress clung with dust and sweat, her hair pulled back tight. She set the pail down, leaned against the stall, and watched him work. For a long time, neither spoke. The smell of hay and sweat filled the space, the lantern light painting both their faces in amber. Finally, Clara said, "You never asked why I left." The hammer stilled in Emmett's hand. He didn't turn, only stared at the beam before him. His voice was low when it came. "Didn't think I'd stomach the answer." She stepped closer, the boards creaking under her weight. "I left because I couldn't stay after the child died. Every corner of the house was a grave. And you—" Her voice caught, but steadied. "You shut me out. I couldn't breathe in a home where every silence felt like blame." Emmett lowered the hammer, his jaw tight. "And when I turned around, you were gone. Left me with nothing but empty rooms and a name folks whispered with pity." The barn went still, save for the restless calf nudging the stall. Clara's gray eyes shimmered in the lamplight, but no tears fell. She had learned long ago not to cry where anyone could see. "I thought leaving was mercy," she said. "Didn't realize it was just another wound." Emmett met her gaze then, years of anger and grief locked inside his chest, finally stirring. "And now? You come back on a wagon like some hired bride, carrying debts and ghosts I never asked for." Clara held his stare, unflinching. "And still you stepped between me and that man." The truth of it hung heavy between them. He had, without thought. The body moves where the heart still knows. Outside, a coyote howled, the sound cutting through the night. The calf pressed close to Clara's hand, and she stroked its head with absent tenderness. Emmett turned back to the beam, raising the hammer once more, though his grip trembled. His voice was rough, nearly breaking. "Maybe I never stopped being your husband. Just forgot how." Clara's hand stilled on the calf. For the first time, her face softened. Not forgiveness? Not yet. But something close enough to hope. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of dust and horse sweat. By midday, Emmett saw riders on the ridge. 3 of them, dark shapes against the pale sky. They lingered there, not moving closer, just watching. Clara spotted them too. Her jaw tightened, but she kept working, mending a torn harness strap with steady hands. "They're not neighbors," Emmett said. "No," Clara replied. "They're his kind. He won't come alone next time." The words sat heavy between them. Emmett checked the rifle by the door, cleaned the revolver by lamplight, stacked cartridges in a neat row. Clara brought in water, baked bread with what little flour was left, salted strips of beef for travel. They didn't speak of leaving, but the preparations made their thoughts plain. That night, as firelight flickered low, Emmett sat at the table, carving small notches into the handle of his rifle. Across from him, Clara stitched a tear in her shawl. The silence was thick, not hostile, but waiting. "You could still go," he said at last. His eyes stayed on the wood grain beneath his hands. "Find a place farther west. Start again." Clara's stitching paused. Her gray eyes lifted, steady as stone. "Running's all I've done. And look where it brought me. Back here." Emmett finally looked at her. "Back to me, you mean?" Her lips pressed tight, but she didn't look away. "If that's what this place still is, home, you'll have to decide if you want me in it." The fire popped, sending sparks across the hearth. Emmett leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. He studied her. The scar, the lines carved by years of hard road, the strength she carried like armor. She wasn't the girl he had married, but maybe neither was he the man she had left. The howl of coyotes echoed again from the ridge. This time, horses answered with restless snorts from the corral. Clara stood, crossed to the window, and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. Torchlight flickered faint in the distance. "They're closer tonight," she said quietly. Emmett rose, set the rifle on the table, and blew out the lantern. Darkness closed around them, broken only by the glow of the hearth. He stood beside her at the window. 3 torches moved along the ridge, slow, deliberate. Not an attack, a warning. "They want you afraid," Emmett said. Clara's voice was a whisper, but firm. "Then they don't know me." He glanced at her profile in the firelight, the hard line of her jaw, the steadiness in her gaze. Something inside him shifted, an old wound loosening. She had run before, but now she stood her ground. And so would he. Dawn broke red over the horizon, the kind of light that felt like a warning. Emmett saddled the mare in silence, checked her shoes, tightened the cinch twice, though it didn't need it. Clara moved through the yard, drawing water from the well, stacking kindling, her eyes never leaving the ridge. The riders were gone, but their absence carried its own weight. Inside the cabin, the air was close, heavy with the smell of black coffee and gun oil. Emmett laid out the rifle, the revolver, a box of shells. Clara came in carrying the water bucket, set it down by the hearth, and stood watching him. "You're set on fighting," she said. "I'm set on not running," he replied. She studied him for a long moment, then crossed to the table. Without a word, she began checking the revolver, her scarred fingers moving with a familiarity that startled him. She broke it open, spun the cylinder, slid cartridges into place as if she'd done it 100 times. Emmett's brow furrowed. "Who taught you?" Her eyes stayed on the gun. "The same man who broke my arm." She clicked the revolver shut, laid it on the table. "He thought teaching me made me his. He was wrong." The words sat between them, jagged as glass. Emmett wanted to reach for her, to erase the memory carved into her bones, but he stayed still. Instead, he pushed the rifle toward her. "If they come," he said, "we'll meet them together." Her gray eyes lifted to his. For the first time, there was no wall between them, only the raw truth of what they had survived apart, and what they might yet survive together. The day dragged long. Heat shimmered off the prairie, the sky cloudless, too quiet. Every creak of the cabin boards, every crow's cry set their nerves tight. Emmett worked the fence line. Clara kept the calf fed, but both kept the rifle close. By sundown, the tension broke. Hoofbeats thundered across the hard ground, closer this time, not lingering at the ridge. Emmett stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. Clara stood beside him, shawl gone, sleeves rolled high, revolver steady in her hand. 4 riders emerged from the dust, their faces half-shadowed by hats, their coats dark. The one with the scarred jaw, the man from before, pulled up first, spitting into the dirt. His smile was thin, brittle. "Evening, Klein. Brought some friends this time. Thought we might settle the matter proper." The others fanned out, horses restless, hands near their holsters. The sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the yard. Emmett felt the weight of the rifle in his grip, the thrum of blood in his ears. Beside him, Clara's breath was steady, her stance unshaken. "Then let's settle it," Emmett said. His voice carried, stronger than he felt. The scarred man laughed low. "Brave words. Shame they'll be your last." The silence after was sharp enough to cut. The first move hadn't come yet, but the air was charged, ready to break like dry timber under a spark. And in that breath before violence, Emmett realized the truth. Whatever happened next, he and Clara were no longer divided by the years between them. They stood as one. The yard went silent except for the creak of leather and the restless snort of horses. The scarred man's grin twitched, waiting for Emmett to falter, waiting for Clara to flinch. Neither moved. Then a hand twitched. Dust rose. The first shot cracked. Emmett's rifle roared, the recoil biting into his shoulder. One rider pitched sideways, crashing to the dirt. Clara's revolver spat fire, her aim sharp and certain, forcing another man to wheel his horse hard to the left. The porch exploded with noise, smoke, and splinters. Horses screamed. The scarred man fired wild, bullets slamming into the cabin wall. Emmett dropped to one knee, chambered another round, and fired again. A horse reared, throwing its rider into the dust. Clara moved like she had always belonged with a weapon. She stepped forward, unshaken, her revolver steady in both hands. Another shot rang out, and the third rider toppled from his saddle. Only the scarred man remained, his face twisted with rage, his pale eyes burning in the twilight. He spurred his horse hard, charging straight at the porch. Clara fired once, missed, wood splintering near the corral. Emmett's rifle jammed, the lever refusing to move. The scarred man drew his pistol, screaming a curse that tore through the yard. Clara stepped down from the porch, her boots sinking into the dust. She raised the revolver with both hands, held her ground, and fired. The shot echoed across the valley. The scarred man jerked in the saddle, his gun falling limp from his hand. He slumped, toppled, and hit the earth with a heavy thud. His horse galloped on, riderless, into the open plain. The yard went quiet again, the smoke drifting, the echoes fading into the hills. 3 bodies lay in the dirt. One rider groaned, crawling away, but no fight was left in him. Emmett lowered the useless rifle, chest heaving. Clara stood in the dust, revolver still warm, her eyes fixed on the man she had once fled from. She let the gun drop to her side, the weight finally leaving her shoulders. Emmett stepped toward her, slow, deliberate. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Her palm was rough, scarred, calloused by years of work and survival, but it fit against his like it always had. They stood together in the fading light, the yard littered with the cost of violence. Beyond the ridge, the coyotes began their night song, a reminder that life moved on, indifferent to men's debts and reckonings. Emmett squeezed her hand. She looked up at him, storm-gray eyes softer now, the fight drained but the strength still there. For the first time since she'd stepped off the wagon, neither of them felt alone. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire and ash. The ranch was theirs again, not as it had been, but as something new, born of loss and struggle, stitched together by the simple act of standing side by side. Sometimes love did not return as it had been. Sometimes it came back, scarred, heavier, but stronger for surviving the fire.